I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The palace did not announce a routine adjustment. It announced a transfer of power unlike anything the modern monarchy had witnessed. Behind closed doors, King Charles placed his authority behind a proclamation naming Prince William Supreme Regent, giving his eldest son an unprecedented position beside the throne. The words were brief. The reaction was not, because within minutes, everyone inside the royal household understood the same terrifying truth. The monarchy had just entered a new age. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the title would strike harder than any ordinary palace statement. A regency is normally a temporary arrangement allowing another royal to carry out sovereign duties when the monarch cannot. But this proclamation went further by giving William broad authority while his father remained firmly on the throne. That difference mattered, because the king was not stepping away. He was deliberately placing the future king inside decisions that had always flowed directly through him. William sat opposite his father before the announcement, listening as Charles chose every word with painful care. The prince had expected greater responsibility one day, but not like this, and not while the man across from him still carried the crown. Charles slid the signed proclamation toward him. William read the words again, then lifted his eyes without speaking. "This is no longer preparation," the king said. The sentence landed with more force than the title itself, and William's disbelief hardened into quiet resolve. Senior courtiers felt the shock almost immediately. Only a tiny circle had seen the final language before it was approved, and the documented proclamation made clear that this was not a ceremonial promotion dressed up for headlines. It placed William at the center of major crown duties, constitutional responsibilities, and internal royal decisions that once demanded Charles's personal intervention. The crown, meaning the sovereign authority exercised in the monarch's name, had not changed hands, but the route through which that authority could now move had changed dramatically. Camilla understood the danger before many around her did. The queen consort knew William's elevation could narrow the informal influence surrounding Charles, and she wanted to know exactly where his authority began inside the palace and where hers ended. She asked for clarification almost at once, but the answers were not simple. William had gained power without becoming king, while Charles had shared control without surrendering the throne. But before William could understand what he had inherited, the people closest to Charles began asking a far more personal question. Who would lose power because William had suddenly gained so much? Power inside a royal family is never only constitutional, it is personal. For King Charles, the proclamation places enormous trust in the son who has spent his entire life waiting behind him. For William, it creates responsibility without the protection of distance. And for Queen Camilla, it introduces an unsettling reality. The future king is no longer merely waiting his turn. He now possesses the authority to shape the palace, while Charles is still wearing the crown. Charles had waited most of his life to become monarch, and that made the decision harder than anyone outside the palace could understand. Preparing William now meant surrendering parts of the control he had waited decades to exercise himself. The Supreme Regent Proclamation, the formal order giving the prince expanded authority while his father remained sovereign, did not remove the king from power, but it forced him to share power before succession had actually happened. That distinction cut deeply. William felt the weight almost immediately. Catherine found him alone after the announcement, and there was no celebration in him. He had always known that one day the crown would become his burden, but he had imagined that moment arriving after a clear ending to his father's reign. This was different. The prince admitted that accepting authority directly from Charles felt far heavier than inheriting it after the natural course of succession. Catherine listened closely, then told him the danger was obvious. He now had to look strong without ever looking impatient. Camilla carried a different fear into the evening. She approached Charles privately and asked whether William could now overrule arrangements connected to her household. The queen consort expected a clean answer. She did not receive one. The king hesitated, chose his words carefully, and spoke instead about coordination and responsibility. She lowered her voice and asked again. Could the prince stop decisions she had previously handled through Charles? This time, the monarch said nothing. His silence gave her the answer she feared. William refused to move blindly. He privately requested a full briefing from senior aides covering every power that remained exclusively with Charles, and every responsibility now placed within his own remit. A remit simply means the specific area of authority someone is allowed to control. The prince wanted boundaries because every step beyond them could look like ambition, and every refusal to use them could make the proclamation meaningless. Catherine understood the trap before he said it aloud. William had been handed enough authority to change the palace, but he could not appear eager to use it. Charles had trusted him. Camilla was watching him, and every courtier now wanted to know whether the future king would behave like an heir or like a monarch already waiting behind the door. But the deeper mystery was no longer what William could do. It was why Charles had acted now. And when the palace looked back for the moment that truly changed Charles's mind, every road led to the same locked room, the same interrupted meeting, and the same decision William had refused to make quietly. The proclamation did not begin with ceremony. It began with failure. Weeks before William was elevated, a private royal meeting collapsed into a confrontation so serious that Charles later described it as impossible to ignore. One decision had stalled. Two competing instructions had reached senior staff, and when William discovered that his father's authority was being interpreted differently by separate palace circles, he did something dangerous. He refused to pretend the confusion could continue. Charles had resisted dramatic change because he knew what it might suggest. His household still protected the established structure of the sovereign, while William's team was preparing for responsibilities that seemed to be arriving faster than anyone expected. A royal household is simply the group of officials and staff supporting a senior royal's duties. But when two powerful households begin sending different instructions, confusion can become dangerous. The king feared that creating a new arrangement would make his reign look weakened before it was actually over. William reached his breaking point during a closed strategy meeting at Windsor. Two sets of instructions landed before him concerning the same major engagement and the crown responsibilities attached to it. The prince read both, placed them down, and refused to approve either course. He told Charles that he would not move until there was one clear chain of command. That phrase meant one unmistakable line showing who had final authority. For the future king, this was no longer about paperwork. It was about whether the monarchy could function under pressure. Charles took the challenge personally. After the room emptied, he asked William whether he believed the king's household had lost control. The prince hesitated, but he did not retreat. He told his father that the institution could not survive if everyone was protecting authority instead of exercising responsibility. The words cut deeply. The king had waited decades to lead, and now his own son was warning him that leadership itself had become divided. William regretted the harshness almost immediately. Still, he refused to take the warning back. Charles watched him closely and recognized something uncomfortable. This was not an impatient heir demanding more power. This was a future sovereign identifying a weakness before it became a crisis. The king later described that realization in a documented private account prepared for his advisors, making clear that the Windsor confrontation had changed his thinking. Charles acted that same night. He summoned a trusted constitutional advisor and asked whether an enhanced regency framework could be created without ending or diminishing his reign. A regency framework is the legal structure allowing another royal to carry out sovereign responsibilities under defined conditions. The question itself marked the point of no return. William had forced the issue into the open, and Charles could no longer dismiss succession planning as something for another day. The Supreme Regent proclamation began there. But when William finally saw how much authority his father intended to transfer, gratitude vanished. Charles had finally decided to share the weight of the crown. But when William saw exactly how much of that weight was being transferred, he feared his father was giving away something he could never reclaim. William had spent his entire life preparing to inherit the throne. Yet when the moment came to accept unprecedented authority, he resisted. Not because he feared responsibility, but because he understood what the proclamation might look like from the outside, and what it might feel like to his father. Inside a private palace room, with aides deliberately excluded, the future king forced Charles to confront the one fear neither man wanted to say aloud: replacement. Charles tried to make the difference clear. This was not abdication, retirement, or surrender. Abdication means a monarch formally gives up the throne, and the king insisted that nothing close to that was happening. The crown remained his. William would simply carry enough authority to prevent the palace from freezing whenever responsibility crossed between households. But the prince knew public emotion rarely follows legal wording. Every strong decision he made could be read as proof that his father was already slipping into the background. William waited until the final aide left, then closed the door. He looked directly at Charles and spoke without ceremony. "I will serve you. I will not replace you while you are still here." The king turned away. The words struck, because they separated duty from ambition, in a way neither man had managed before. William was willing to carry the burden. He was not willing to behave as though the throne had already changed hands. Charles understood the loyalty inside that refusal, but he also felt the pain beneath it. Charles finally admitted something he had rarely spoken about so openly. He remembered the long years behind Queen Elizabeth II, waiting for a role he knew would come, but never knowing when. The late monarch had defined stability for generations, while her son remained heir for decades. Charles told William he did not want that same frustration to harden inside him. The king had spent too much of his own life waiting. He would not force his son to spend the future doing the same. William then noticed one clause buried deeper in the proclamation. It gave him authority to intervene when internal royal disputes threatened the stability or reputation of the crown. A royal clause is simply a specific rule inside a formal order defining what someone may do. The prince looked up immediately and asked who had demanded its inclusion. Charles did not hesitate. He had. The king admitted, through a documented account prepared after the meeting, that he wanted William to possess the power he himself had often avoided using when family disputes began spilling into institutional danger. Charles had learned the cost of waiting too long. His son would not be left equally exposed. William understood then that this was bigger than succession. The proclamation had given him permission to step directly into conflicts others once kept beyond his reach. And one person would test that power sooner than anyone expected. Father and son left the room with their bond intact, but the proclamation had created a new center of gravity, and the first person pulled into its force would be the queen beside the throne. The phrase, Supreme Regent, sounded ceremonial. Inside the palace, its practical meaning was anything but ceremonial. William now possessed leverage over decisions that touched staffing, scheduling, strategic royal priorities, crisis management, and the protection of the crown's long-term stability. Yet the most explosive part was not what the title allowed him to do publicly. It was what Charles had authorized him to stop privately. And one tense exchange with Camilla proved that the new hierarchy was already real. Charles remained sovereign, and that distinction mattered. The king still held the crown, but William now carried elevated coordinating authority whenever major issues crossed between separate royal households and wider palace responsibilities. A royal household is the team that manages a senior royal's official work. And the new structure meant those teams could no longer work around one another when a decision affected the monarchy as a whole. The prince was no longer simply waiting to decide one day. He was deciding now. Camilla discovered that reality during what she expected to be a routine meeting. She brought forward changes connected to her royal program and expected the usual approval process to continue. William listened, then calmly told her the proposal would be reviewed under the new structure before anything moved ahead. The queen consort's expression hardened. She asked whether this meant her plans now required his approval. The prince answered carefully, but he did not retreat. The process had changed, and she knew it. Camilla went directly to Charles afterward. She told the king that William's position risked creating a palace within the palace, one center of authority competing with another. Charles rejected that fear. He told her the monarchy could no longer survive through overlapping influence and private routes to approval. The queen consort pushed back, but the monarch remained firm. For the first time, she understood that her husband's decision was not theoretical. He intended the new system to hold. William felt no victory in the confrontation. Catherine later warned him that authority used too sharply could fracture the family even if the rules were technically right. The prince agreed, but he also knew that weakening the structure during its first test would destroy it. She urged restraint. He promised restraint, not retreat. Senior staff soon learned that William had requested historical files covering earlier regencies, emergency royal powers, and unresolved household disputes. A regency is an arrangement that allows another royal to carry out sovereign duties under defined conditions. The request caused whispers, but his purpose was narrower than many feared. William wanted to know exactly where his authority ended, before others tried to stretch it for him. Charles noticed the discipline. The king had expected ambition to be the danger. Instead, his son was searching for limits, but caution could not stop the consequences. The proclamation had existed first as words on a page. Now those words were beginning to close doors, and the shock of hearing those doors shut would expose how much had truly changed. Real power becomes visible when someone hears the word no. Days after William assumes his new position, palace routines that had survived for years begin changing. Meetings are rerouted, requests are reviewed, access is no longer assumed. Charles watches the machinery move with a mixture of relief and unease, while Camilla feels the institution tightening around her. Then one quiet refusal inside the palace makes everyone understand that William intends to use the authority he accepted. William moves first against confusion, not against people. He orders that major requests crossing more than one royal household must pass through a single review process, instead of separate offices seeking different approvals. That matters because competing decisions had already helped create the crisis at Windsor. A review process simply means one clear route for checking and approving important requests, and the prince believes that, without it, the same dangerous uncertainty will return. Charles keeps appearing as sovereign, carrying out his duties, and protecting the public sense of continuity. Behind those duties, however, the king allows his son to take more responsibility for strategic coordination and difficult family questions. William feels the pressure immediately. Every decision now has two consequences, one for the institution and another for the people closest to him. Camilla receives the clearest warning. A private household request she expects to move forward is returned with instructions that it cannot proceed until William's office reviews it. The queen consort reads the response twice. She sets it beside her untouched tea and quietly tells an aide to leave. Minutes later, she reads it again. This is no longer a debate about what the proclamation might mean. It is happening to her personally. Charles later finds her withdrawn. Camilla asks whether standing beside him now means waiting for his son's approval. The king tells her no, but his reassurance comes with a hard boundary. Crown matters must follow the structure he created. She presses him, reminding him that her role has always depended on trust between them. Charles does not deny that trust. He simply refuses to let private trust replace clear authority. William suffers in a different way. Catherine sees that enforcing rules against relatives is beginning to harden him. She tells the prince that becoming king cannot mean becoming emotionally unreachable before he even reaches the throne. He admits that every refusal feels personal, even when the rule is not. Catherine urges him to remember the difference between firmness and distance. William listens, but the pressure does not disappear. A senior courtier then warns William privately that some inside the household believe too much influence has been concentrated in one person before succession. The prince does not punish the criticism. Instead, he sends his first major decisions back to Charles for personal review. Charles approves every one without alteration. That changes everything. William finally understands that he is not taking authority from his father. The king is consciously giving him permission to use it. But the true turning point would not come from regulations, advisors, or palace offices. It would come during a private conversation, in which Charles finally told William why he had chosen him now. After days of palace tension, Charles asks William to meet him without advisors, secretaries, or constitutional language between them. No briefing folders, no officials, only father and son. What follows changes the emotional meaning of the entire proclamation. Charles does not speak first about duty or precedent. He speaks about time, about the years he once believed he had, about mistakes he no longer wants repeated, and finally, about why William had to be empowered before necessity made the choice for them. Charles speaks with a calm that makes the moment heavier. He tells his son that monarchy has always depended on slow preparation, but modern crises do not wait for tradition to catch up. Succession simply means the transfer of the crown from one monarch to the next. Yet the king knows that learning authority only after that moment can be dangerous. The world moves too quickly. One bad decision can harden before anyone has time to correct it. William listens without interrupting. Charles removes his glasses and admits that the hardest part of kingship was discovering how many choices become irreversible before a monarch ever feels fully ready. The king tells him that the new position exists to create continuity before emergency, not after it. Continuity means making sure the institution keeps working, even when circumstances suddenly change. For Charles, that has become the heart of the entire decision. William finally says what has been troubling him from the beginning. Every time he exercises the authority he has been given, he fears he is shortening his father's reign in the eyes of the public. The prince knows Charles remains sovereign, but symbolism can be brutal. One strong intervention from the future king could be read as proof that the present king is already fading. Charles refuses to let that fear control them. He tells William that keeping all authority for himself would be vanity, not strength. The king would rather endure whispers that he has surrendered influence than leave his son unprepared when the crown eventually passes. In a documented account, prepared after their private conversation, Charles makes the reason plain. Preparation must happen while there is still time for guidance, correction, and trust. William then hears the final truth. Charles chose the extraordinary title deliberately. He wanted every household, advisor, and courtier to understand that when the prince speaks on matters entrusted to him, he speaks with the king's authority. That was the message. Not replacement, not rivalry. Authority with permission. William's resistance finally softens. He promises his father that he will protect not only the future monarchy, but the dignity of Charles's reign while the transition unfolds. The king accepts the promise without ceremony. For the first time, the new arrangement feels less like a transfer and more like an alliance. Inside the palace, father and son had finally reached peace. But outside those walls, Britain was waking to a headline that made the future suddenly feel much closer. By morning, the secret language of palace power belongs to everyone. Broadcasters interrupt ordinary coverage. Newspapers treat the proclamation not as a minor constitutional adjustment, but as the clearest sign yet that William's future reign has moved closer to the present. Crowds gather. Commentators argue. Supporters see stability. Critics see an unprecedented concentration of authority. Yet one image outside Buckingham Palace captures the public mood better than any headline ever could. Charles understands why the reaction is so intense. The proclamation has created something Britain has rarely seen so clearly: a living bridge between one reign and the next, without formally ending either. A sovereign is the reigning monarch who still holds the crown, while a regent carries defined authority on that monarch's behalf. The king remains firmly in place, but William now possesses power that makes the future feel dangerously close to the present. William watches the coverage with Catherine beside him, and the words begin to bite. One commentator calls him a king in waiting with power already in hand. The prince shifts uneasily. He knows how quickly preparation can be mistaken for replacement. Catherine tells him quietly that he cannot control what strangers decide the proclamation means. He can only control how he uses it. William listens, but the warning stays with him. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public mood becomes impossible to ignore. Television crews broadcast live as a crowd gathers beneath the balcony, some excited, others uneasy. One elderly man holds photographs of Charles and William side by side and tells a reporter, "One is our king. The other is clearly being asked to carry him forward." The sentence spreads because it captures the contradiction perfectly. Britain is not watching a succession. It is watching two generations share the weight before succession arrives. A morning newspaper pushes the tension even further. Its front page places William beneath the words, "The King's Chosen Hand," framing the proclamation as the most dramatic transfer of royal authority in a generation. The phrase follows the prince throughout the day. It sounds loyal. It also sounds dangerously close to final. Charles knows his next appearance will be studied for weakness. Commentators wait for hesitation, distance, or some sign that the king regrets what he has done. Instead, he appears beside William during a major palace engagement and allows his son to step forward first. The gesture is small, but the message is unmistakable. The monarch is not being pushed aside. He is directing the transition himself. William understands the significance immediately. Catherine does too. Charles has answered the nation without a speech. The crowds had seen two generations standing together, but only one final verdict remained. What Charles had truly surrendered, what William had truly accepted, and whether the crown emerged weaker or stronger. In the end, King Charles did not abdicate. William did not seize the throne, and the monarchy did not collapse beneath two competing centers of power. Something subtler happened, and perhaps something more historic. A father accepted that preserving his reign required preparing for the day it would end. A son accepted authority without demanding the crown attached to it. And an institution built on inheritance discovered that survival sometimes depends upon sharing responsibility before tradition says the moment has arrived. Charles remained sovereign, and that fact never changed. William's appointment as Supreme Regent created a formal mechanism through which the heir could carry major responsibilities with the king's full backing. A sovereign is the reigning monarch who still holds final royal authority, while the new arrangement allowed the prince to exercise defined powers in his father's name. That distinction mattered because it prevented the transition from becoming a contest. The crown stayed with Charles, but responsibility no longer rested on him alone. William understood the difference most clearly during one final private meeting after the public reaction began to settle. He brought the original signed proclamation back to his father and placed it before him. Charles looked at the document, then pushed it back across the table. The king told him it belonged in his keeping now. This time, the prince did not hesitate. He accepted it without protest, because the paper no longer felt like a threat to his father's reign. It felt like a promise to protect it. Camilla reached her own difficult understanding. The queen consort had feared that William's rise would push her aside. But the new structure was not designed to humiliate her or erase her place beside Charles. It was designed to make sure that personal relationships could never again replace clear royal authority. She accepted that reality slowly, but she accepted it because the king himself had chosen the system. Charles had achieved something larger than a transfer of duties. He had turned preparation into policy before illness, emergency, or succession could force his hand. The monarch's strongest act of control was deciding when to share control. William answered that trust with restraint. The future king proved that greater power did not require diminishing the man who gave it to him. The final meaning of the proclamation was now impossible to misunderstand. It was neither the premature end of Charles's reign nor the unofficial beginning of William's. It was the moment two reigns were deliberately connected instead of being left to collide. Father and son did not end as rivals divided by succession. They ended as two generations carrying the same burden together, one still wearing the crown, the other finally trusted to help protect it. There is no unresolved battle left behind, only the lasting image of a king who chose preparation over pride, and a future king who proved he could hold extraordinary power without reaching prematurely for the throne. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.